I want to read you a sentence or two out of the book Glory Revealed, out of chapter 5, the glory of God revealed through sin. Scandalous sin rarely starts as a premeditated choice to live blatantly against God's commands. More often than not, it's about a progression of tiny, small steps fueled by selfishness and pride, a lot of little bitty sins that add up to the big downfall. You know, I don't think a lot of people on death row in prisons say that one day I woke up and decided to ruin my life by taking this big step of doing something so tragic. I think if you talk to a lot of people on death row, you might hear stories like this. Maybe somebody that would tell you, one day when I was a teenager, I walked in a store and I stole one CD. I got away with it, so a few weeks later, I went back to that store and stole a handful of CDs. Eventually, I started to steal a lot, and one day I was stealing a car when a police officer tried to stop me, and in trying to not get caught, I ended up taking his life. And now here I am on death row, and I think, wow, those tiny little steps eventually brought me to this very place where I've ruined my life. Now I'm saying that to say that most people don't think that they're going to do big things that are blatantly against God, but they end up there with tiny little steps, tiny little moments where they compromise, and the next thing you know, they're a whole lot further than they ever wanted to be. Nowhere is that even more evident than in the story of David when it comes to Bathsheba. David, as the king of his nation, was a man who loved God, and one day he goes to the rooftop of his castle and he sees Bathsheba. As soon as he sees her bathing, instead of running away, he decides to take this tiny little step of disobedience by staying there and watching. Then he takes the next step and he invites her to come to the castle. And then the next step, and he's involved in adultery. Eventually, when she's pregnant, David decides that he needs to have her husband killed so that he can keep his reputation. See, on that rooftop, the very first moment when he went there and he saw Bathsheba, I don't think David was thinking, I'm going to become an adulteress and a murderer, and I'm going to give a black eye to my kingdom and ruin my reputation for the remainder of history. But no, that tiny first step of disobedience led to the next, and eventually he was involved in such sin that throughout history we read about. See, you and I need to attack sin. We don't need to take it lightly. Even those tiny little things, that's where God calls us to be obedient, so that in the big things we don't find ourselves falling away. The good news about David's story is, though, once he is confronted about that sin by the prophet Nathan, David's response is brokenness. Once David realizes the scope of what he's done, once David realizes that these tiny little steps have led to such a big downfall, there's real repentance and brokenness in the heart of David. Listen to what he says in Psalm 51. David says, "Turn your face from my sins, God, and blot out all of my guilt. Create in me, God, a clean heart, and renew a steadfast spirit within me."